guys are into your 90s, your one-stop shop for everything except for what we advertise for.
And today we're going back down the rabbit hole and we're taking a look at boys' love and the origin of the Omegaverse.
Now, just to do some housekeeping, this video will not be about the history of boys' love in general. That's a big topic that deserves its own video.
For now, we're just going to give you an introduction to the genre.
So the term boys' love is actually an umbrella term that houses several other genres.
And most of you actually might be very familiar with the most common ones in those genres, which is yaoi and shonen-ai. Yaoi focusing more on the physical aspect of the relationship, and shonen-ai focusing more on the emotional part.
So think shonen-ai is more like Sasaki and Miyano.
Hey, can I tell you something? Sure. Thing is, Miyano, I like you.
And yaoi is more like Junjo Romantica.
Now, we have to ask, what the hell is the Omegaverse?
Well, for starters, it's the most popular in the boys' love genre. Let it be known it's not limited to the boys' love genre. You can find Omegaverse stories in both girls' love and straight romance stories.
In the world of the Omegaverse, people find themselves with not only just male and female gender, but also a secondary gender, which they refer to as alpha, beta, or omega. This gets its idea quite a bit from the influence of wolf hierarchy.
And their strict family-centered instinct. Alphas run the pack and get the most food, followed by the second-in-command betas, and then omegas are the weakest or least cared about.
So how does this translate into the world of Omegaverse dealing with people?
So alphas are considered the best of the best. Everything typically would come easier to them due to their genetic superiority, whether it be academics, sports, or any other thing you could think of. Even their sheer presence can be intimidating since they can give off extraordinarily strong pheromones that can be very dominating. They also go through what is called a rut, in which alphas have an ardent desire to find someone to mate with. Alphas also typically only make up around maybe 10% of the population in most stories, and similar to what will later go on with omegas, they do also have medication available to help control their ruts, though it doesn't always help.
Betas are more of the everyman of the Omega universe. They're like the average baseline person, but based on the writer and the storyline, they might have a little more involvement or extra attributes.
Now let's get to the omegas, the one that the universe is actually named after. Omegas, regardless of being male or female, can give birth to children. Men, like women, will have a uterus, but theirs has rear access. Omegas every so often go through what we call a heat cycle, similar to that of an alpha's rut. While in their heat cycle, they will give off powerful pheromones that will attract alphas for mating. Due to this and the strength of their pheromones, it's not unusual in some stories for omegas to sadly be assaulted. And alphas, of course, do not take any responsibility for this. They totally blame the victim. While there are medications that omegas can take to help control their heat, they're not always foolproof, and there can often be side effects that make you sick, dizzy, or otherwise. Similar to the alphas, omegas only make up a small part of the population, maybe 10%, all depending on the story.
Other common elements in Omegaverse stories are what is called bonding and fated pairs. Bonding happens when an alpha bites the nape of the neck of the omega. By doing this, a few things happen. One is that by biting the nape, no one other than the alpha will be able to smell the omega's pheromones, meaning that even when they go into heat, no one else will be able to be affected by it. The other thing is that by having an alpha do this, the omega can never be it with another person. If the omega tries to even kiss someone else, they can have a reaction like throwing up.
Once the omega has been marked, in many cases, most stories usually have it that the alpha bites the nape of their neck and you see the bite mark on the base of their neck. But in some other stories, such as Wolf Behind Bars, something such as marking actually doesn't happen. In that story, the only way Mega becomes marked is actually once they've become impregnated. And instead of seeing a bite on their neck, you actually get this rose-shaped mark that appears on their neck. Or you have stories like Marking the Omega, where the marking never actually fully stays. It's only ever a temporary mark. And in this case, a almost tattoo-like pattern, depending on which family the alpha is a part of, will appear on the omega. Then there is also the idea of a fated pair, someone who's meant for you. Oftentimes, the idea of a fated pair is kind of thrown into the Omegaverse, but it's only ever mentioned in passing in my experience of reading stories. But in some stories, it is mentioned, and it works out great. But then you have other stories, such as Romantic Layment or Adorned by Fate, where these alphas work to go against their instincts, against the supposed person they're supposed to be with who's perfect for them, in place of someone who they've chosen, who they feel is the person they want to be with for the rest of their life. Actually, in Romantic Layment, I love the Doctor's explanation that fate isn't always what it's supposed to be. At the end of the day, it is just pheromones. You get overwhelmed and shocked by this unique pheromone smell, but that doesn't mean you're actually meant to be with the person. There have been cases where, after the effects have worn off, they find they're not meant to be due to incompatibility of their personality.
All in all, while this is some of the basics of how your typical Omegaverse story would normally work, it all depends on the author and the world they're trying to build. So a genre filled with pheromones, male pregnancy, fated pairs. How would people even come up with this idea?
When looking deeper into the origins, you will often find our favorite demon hunters at the center of its creation.
Wait, are you telling me that Supernatural had a hand in creating the Omegaverse?
That's right. But while they are credited with the creation, it's not as obvious as you may think. See, no matter where I looked, Supernatural had all the credit. Yet no one could tell me which actual episode or event inspired the idea, which only ever made it harder to figure out how people came up with the Omegaverse. It was only ever said that the episode that premiered that inspired everything came out in the fall of 2010. This left me to search through seasons 5 and 6 of the series. Even after going through each episode, nothing was left clear-cut. None of the episodes had a clear connection to the Omegaverse. Nothing that's gonna be like, oh, that's how they got it. After going through a season's worth of episodes, I finally decided that episode 8 in season 6, All Dogs Go to Heaven, must be it. And the only thing it ever mentions about there being an alpha and a monster called a skinwalker.
That's it?
That's it.
So it's settled then. You bag the howler, bring it home to Papa.
But how do people go from just alphas to what the Omegaverse is today?
Well, Professor Christine Bousset says that the Omegaverse is a seemingly perfect storm, and she couldn't be more true.
As we continued digging deeper and deeper, we found there were certain other contributing factors, such as a certain 60s sci-fi show that sparked to one of the greatest fan cultures ever to date and has grossed more money and had more spin-offs that would put Disney to shame.
Are you saying Star Trek?
More specifically, the 1967 episode Amok Time. In the episode, Spock has been acting very unusual, and it's only after some persistence by Kirk he finally tells him that he is suffering from blood fever, the time where Vulcans are reduced to their primal instincts and minds are totally focused on finding a mate. Spock returns to his homeworld with the intention of marrying his fiancée, who he's been engaged with since he was 7, to find out that she doesn't want to marry him. So she initiates Khalifi, which allows her to choose a champion to fight for her till death. After the Khalifi starts, Spock ends killing Kirk and later reveals that the woman that he was supposed to marry didn't even want to marry Kirk. He wanted to marry her real man, but she didn't want to put him in danger like that. After all that is said and done, Spock even says, if you told me you didn't want to get married, I would have released you from the engagement, but that's all a mute point. Then Spock goes back to Enterprise, ready to pack his bags and leave for killing Kurt, to find out that Kirk had faked his death. And later on, Kurt asks, why don't you have blood fever anymore? What happened? It says,
when I thought I had killed the captain, I found I had lost all interest in Japan.
As we continue to follow the breadcrumbs, we found ourselves knocking at the front door of fan fiction.
That episode of Star Trek became the fire that started fan fiction, stories about Spock and Kurt, and other stories such as Ursula K. Gunn's, also known for writing the 1969 novel The Left Hand of Darkness, about an extraterrestrial, agendered world with hermaphroditic characteristics with a mater cycle named Kemmer.
Another source of inspiration could have come from the sci-fi drama Dark Angel, which stars, you guessed it, Jensen Ackles as a soldier with feline DNA and a female characteristic of going into heat. You guys starting to see a pattern here?
In the 2010s, writing prompts would be put on LiveJournal dedicated to Supernatural. mentioning alpha males having knotting on their penises and bitch males without the knot. Inspiring user The Dirtiest of Socks to write, I ain't no lady, but you'd be the tramp. A real person fanfiction work focusing on Gerald Padecki and John Ackles as Alpha and Omega, published on July 24th, 2010. Despite not using the term Omega, the story created many of the characteristics later associated with the Omegaverse genre.
This will go on until November 9th of 2010, when a new writing prompt mentioning Alpha, Beta, and Omega men for the first time came out, spurring the creation of 3 works. By the time June 2011, the term Omegaverse and its dynamic had become a commonplace. The following month, the first Femme-Flash Omegaverse work was published, and the first use of the tropes outside of the supernatural fandom was recorded.
You will continue to see stories pop up involving Sherlock, X-Men's First Class. Then it quickly reached out to fandoms like Hannibal, Teen Wolf, Glee, Doctor Who, the movie The Avengers.
And what good fandom doesn't have controversy?
In 2018, authors Addison Kane and Zoe Ellis would find themselves in a dispute over copyright in both books. The couple sniffed, purred, growled, nested in den-like enclosures, neck bit to leave marks, and nodding. Kane felt that Ellis had stolen her work and asked her publishers to do something about it. Kane publishers ended up sending a copyright violation to over a dozen retailers like Barns and Nobel, who immediately pulled Ellis's books from the shelves. Now, you might think there is no way these two authors could have actually made such a similar story. And that is where you would be wrong. See, both authors took elements and themes from the booming fan-made genre, the Omegaverse. Now, with the authors of fanfic taking their chances to become publishers, this led to some sleazy tactics and attempts to protect their livelihood. As they use a somewhat outdated 1998 law, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, to get online retailers to remove competitors' books when making a claim. You see, a creator must have a good faith that their ownership of the work in question has been infringed on. Retailers are protected from being named in litigation if they remove the material, and many websites comply with DMCA's without even investigating the claim because of this.
This whole history has all been on the state's end of the Omegaverse history. But what about when it got to Japan? Well, even though the Omegaverse wouldn't start getting traction in Japan until 2014, it wasn't like the idea of male pregnancy didn't exist before that. So it wasn't hard for fans to get behind it and start supporting the subgenre.
And while here in the US, the support was given by fanfiction writers and fanfiction readers alike, in Japan the publishers took a greater interest, including the publisher Fusion Project used the genre in an annual release anthology series called the Omega Project, which reached its 6th season as of 2020. Later, other BL publishers like Libre would start producing Omegaverse stories too.
BL and the Omegaverse will continue to take the world by storm as it made its way to South Korea and China. As of 2020, there have been over 70,000 Omega works published on AO3, or Archive of Our Own, a fan fiction ran site, and 1,000 more other official novels, mangas, and manhwas, and webcomics as well. If you're wondering about taking a dive into the Omegaverse, here are a couple suggestions I have for you to get started. I suggest to start off with ones like Love Shuttle or My Master, My Ju-In, which you can find on places like Lehzin, How to Snag an Alpha, which is on Tappytoons, We're Adorned by Fate, which is Futekia, or if you're looking for one that actually isn't a BL, I highly suggest One Night Only, which can also be found on Lehzin. I would also like to keep in mind that, like most Omega stories, tend to be 18 and up. While there are some that are a little more age-friendly, they're hard to come by. So don't go into it expecting anything less than an 18 rating.
True. And, you know, moving forward, just like enjoy it, you know, just have fun with the concept of the Omegaverse because it's fiction and it's meant to be enjoyed. I personally don't really associate with bestiality. I think it's its own thing, even though they take elements of like animalistic mating.
I also wanted to mention that the feud between Kane and Ellis we only really touched on very lightly, and I really recommend that you guys go and read the New York Times article on the topic. It's actually really interesting, and you guys should really check out the full story.
Well, I think that's it for us.
I think it is too.
Well, make sure you take a look at our other videos. We worked very hard on them.
Don't forget to subscribe.
You don't have to subscribe, but do watch our other videos. Catch you next time. Keep running through the 90s. Bye.